This is Ambition Today.
And I wonder if you know what it means, what it means. And I wonder if you know what it means to find your dream.
What's up, world? My name is Kevin Siskar, and this is Ambition Today, where we analyze success with the most ambitious people for the sake of entrepreneurial science. Like a modern-day Napoleon Hill, we unlock the secret lessons in which you can achieve success, grow your startup, accomplish your goals, and try to change the world today. Last episode, we talked to Jeff Stewart, a serial entrepreneur and now the founder and chairman at Lendo. Lendo uses social data from friends and family to offer microloans all over the world. But today, we are joined by David S. Rose, a man of many titles: entrepreneur, angel investor, mentor, author, and his new book, The Startup Checklist, just became a New York Times bestseller. Today's episode of Ambition Today is brought to you by TopTail. Visit toptail.com/ambition today to hire the top 3% of freelancers from a growing network of the best custom software developers and designers out there. And Audible. Visit audibletrial.com/ambition today to download and keep any audiobook for free. But this week's episode, we have a special book in mind, and you're going to hear all about it. This is Ambition Today.
Looking to make your dreams come true? Needing that extra push to become more successful? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Ambition Today with your host, Kevin Siskar.
What's up, world? You are listening to Ambition Today, and I am your host, Kevin Siskar. I am at the Siskar on Twitter, and you can add me on Snapchat now as KR Siskar. I blog about startups, technology, and life at www.siskar.co, which is also the home of Ambition Today. On today's episode, we are joined by David S. Rose, founder and CEO of Gust. His new book, The Startup Checklist, just became a New York Times bestseller. David is also described by Forbes as New York's archangel, by Businessweek as a world-conquering entrepreneur, and by Crain's New York Business as the father of angel investing in New York. So, David, I am very excited to have you on the show finally. Welcome to Ambition Today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
I'm really excited to have you here this week, especially as the SEC just changed the rules around investing in startups. So we can get into that a little bit later in this episode. But first, I wanted to dive in. Did you have any entrepreneurial influences when you were growing up?
Oh, did I ever? I'm actually extraordinarily fortunate in being a third-generation serial entrepreneur. So my primary influence growing up in terms of entrepreneurial activities was my father, who is currently 87 years old and still entrepreneuring.
Wow.
Back during the dot-com boom, in one of my earlier companies, I was a finalist for the Entrepreneur of the Year award, the Ernst & Young E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year in New York. My father won it in 2003. My father is now 87.
So how old was he when he won that then?
At his late 70s. This is a guy who's completely active. Last week he flew to England to give a speech at the Oxford Literary Society. He published his first book earlier this year, a collection of some of the speeches that he's given over time. Last year, the Vital Speeches magazine, which is the monthly magazine of the greatest political and governmental speeches around, they have a annual award called the Cicero Award for the world's greatest speeches in different areas. Last year, he won 4 separate Cicero Awards in 4 different topic areas. So this is a guy who was completely there and was my absolute mentor. Watching a guy as a role model, as an entrepreneur, do it, and seeing how he behaved in business and seeing how he thought through challenges and problems was an extraordinary role model for me.
What was his main business when you were growing up? What was your childhood memory like of that?
He's a real estate developer. He's actually one of the sort of legendary figures in American real estate development. He's the guy who did Pentagon City in Washington, One Financial Center in Boston. It's a family firm. The firm was started by my grandfather, his father, and my great uncle, who started it back in the 1920s. And so there's a long history of entrepreneurship and business operations in the family.
A deep history, apparently. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so you then went on to Yale and you studied urban affairs, correct?
I did indeed.
So one of my questions is, studying urban affairs and community development, how did that later help you in the startup world?
That's actually a very funny question, because I was at a gathering at TED a couple of years ago. We were having it was like a VIP dinner for hosts. I've been a TEDster for decades. And somebody around the table mentioned something about urban planning, urban affairs. And somebody else said, oh, yeah, I mean, I'm now a scientist, a lawyer or something, but, my undergraduate degree is actually in urban affairs. And the person next to them said, isn't that hysterically funny? I'm now a captain minister or something, but I actually had a degree in urban affairs. We went around the table, and it turned out that like 8 of the 12 people at the table had actually had degrees in urban planning, urban affairs, which was amazing. So no direct applicability, but an extraordinary amount of background. Because if you think about what it means to be involved in urban affairs and in urban planning and the city is this giant living organism. It's growing, and it involves public service and private economics and development and lots of people and lots of competing in different industries and agendas and politics and stuff, and making all that work in a harmonious fashion to come up with a livable city is truly a coordination and collaboration activity that beats all others. And so the same thing in the entrepreneurial world, to figure out how to get all these different pieces working in harmony, to figure out how to balance doing good for the world versus doing good for yourself at the same time, how to work with other people and reconcile different agendas. That was actually a very good background for being an entrepreneur. So
when did you start your first big company?
Well, I started my first company when I was about 10 years old. So growing up as an entrepreneur, if one is an entrepreneur, you sort of feel it. So my first business was Rose Productions, a multimedia organization. And back then, my brother was a magician who did children's parties and stuff. And so I convinced him, we're not going to salesmanship, that he, of course, needed to have marketing communications materials. He needed a headshot and business cards and posters and programs. And, of course, Rose Productions could supply these for him. So I did all that for him. And that was great until after about a year or so, my one client realized the sum total of his revenues equal the sum total of my revenues. And there was a slight problem with this operation. So lost my first client, but I then went on to, in high school, I sold VX6 battery additive and did some freelance graphic design. When I was in college, my college way back in the dark ages of the previous century actually had working fireplaces. So we had no wood, so I would buy firewood wholesale and sell at retail. I got involved with the college print shop and ended up teaching 75 people how to print and running the whole print shop as a for-profit operation, as well as doing things for the school. Then I got out of school and feeling very entrepreneurial-ish with a degree in urban affairs, which is an interesting kind of degree, but not exactly prepping you for a career as a lawyer or a doctor or whatever it is. I had no particular preconceived notion as to what I was going to do. So I was debating between going for a master's in type design in Florence, because my minor and my side interest is in the history of books and the art of the book and typography and design. Either that or going to Disney to work as an Imagineer. So I actually applied to Disney to design rides and work as an Imagineer, which I thought was pretty cool. But in the middle of all that, I got a call totally out of the blue from U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who I'd actually volunteered for and had known. And he offered me the job as his special assistant for urban affairs. So I said, whoa, well, that's cool. So that's what I did. And so my first career was actually in government, working for Pat Moynihan as his urban affairs person, where I had an enormous amount of fun working for a senator. And, sort of as a 22-year-old kid coming out of college, you inherit all the gravitas from the senator. So I was conducting congressional investigations and sitting on boards with the mayor and having an enormous amount of fun. The only problem was that at heart, I was an entrepreneur. And after a couple of years, I decided that I really wanted to be part of the motive power of society, the engine that made it work, which is not government. So I regretfully left Moynihan, where I was succeeded by my brother, by the way, the magician, who at that point was off getting a doctorate in government and stuff. And he worked for Moynihan, and then he became ultimately the chairman of the New York City Planning Commission. So he actually put all of his training to work in that area. And I went back to Columbia, got an MBA in real estate finance, and joined the family business in real estate development. So I then spent the next decade doing real estate development. But as an entrepreneurial type and a hackery type on the side, I started a company with my business school professor called the Computer Classroom, one of the first, the earliest of the personal computer training companies, 1983. So we did corporate training and how to use things like spreadsheets, which were a new thing. There's something called VisiCalc had just come out, and Microsoft Word. And so we did that for a while. And while I was in real estate, it's my main day job. And then I started another company on the side called Ex Machina, which developed a product called the Wrist Mac, which was a digital watch that plugged into your Mac and uploaded and downloaded data from your Mac to your watch 28 years before the Apple Watch.
Wow. Talk about it being early to market.
Well, I wore that, I will tell you, I wore my wrist Mac for 28 years until last June when I got my Apple Watch. So I was loyal to my own product, and for 28 years I've worn a wrist Mac until I got my Apple Watch.
A wrist Mac. I love that. I'll have to look that up. Can I still order one?
Well, if you did, it would come to me, and I'll replace your battery for you. But the first person to buy one of the wrist Macs was Bill Atkinson, who wrote much of the Mac operating system, and then Fred Smith from FedEx, and it was actually a hit product for quite a while. But that ended up through a very long, complicated story, which your listeners would probably be bored out of their tears to hear. Ended up starting from that into a wireless messaging company. We were to do a wireless wrist Mac, but then realized that there was no really wireless wrist watch, so we ended up doing a paging software application, and my little company became the world's leading paging software company. So you type a message on your computer to send to a pager, and then along came the internet, and that the company morphed again into the world's first internet wireless broadcast company called Air Media Live. Which had a product called the Newscatcher, a little black pyramid that plugged into your computer and took in all this stuff coming over the internet, which was amazingly cool. And so that one, I sort of fell backwards into raising venture capital. We had a bunch of really interesting VCs and folks investing in us. And when the product launched, it got lots of publicity and press. Walt Mossberg did a full Wall Street Journal article about it. The technology in the Smithsonian. We ended up growing to about 125 people and a multinational and raised lots and lots of money. And then this thing called the internet crash came along. Dum, 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 dum. And that was the end of that, whereupon I was grounded by the highest of all authorities, the spouse authority.
Oh, okay. All right.
And so I couldn't start another company again. But that's all I could do was become an angel investor. So I began angel investing.
Is that how you got the start into angel investing? Is that when New York Angels came about, or was that a little bit later?
Nope, that's how I got my start in angel investing. I was actually the guy who invented social networking. And you want to talk about somebody who you should have on the program. I bet you didn't know that the inventor, that A, somebody invented social networking, B, he patented it, and C, he's here in New York as an entrepreneur.
Andrew, right?
Andrew, you got it. Andrew Weinrich. So Andrew, who had created the world's first social networking site, 6 Degrees, he was smart and sold it at the top of the dot-com boom, not waiting for the crash, for quite a bit of capital. Unfortunately, the crash happened like the next day, and since it was mostly he'd been compensated in stock for it, so he was back on the street looking around, and so he came to me and said, since I was a wireless guy, he had an idea for a wireless startup. But unfortunately, I was still not allowed to start a startup, so I became his angel investor instead of his partner. And that's how we started Joltage, that he was the CEO of. And that was my first angel investment. And then as a joiner, I joined the local angel group in New York, which was from the New York New Media Association, NINMA, which was the sort of trade association for the dot-com world that I had helped to found in 95. And I did some more angel investments. And then in the dot-com crash, the trade association went bankrupt. Imagine like New York Tech Meetup going under. This was like the New York New Media Association went under. So I spun off the people who have been members of that and created New York Angels, founded New York Angels, which is today one of the world's most active angel investment groups. But the interesting thing is, not only am I a third-generation serial entrepreneur, I am actually, I believe, the world's only third-generation angel investor. Because my late great-uncle, after whom I was named, who was born in the 19th century, to put things in perspective, was the angel investor behind the portable kidney dialysis unit, vascular stapling, hyperbaric operating chambers, desalination projects, through-the-wall air conditioning an incredible guy. So he was, in some sense, another one of my role models. And that's how I became an angel and have been investing ever since.
So can you give the audience a little bit, so an angel group, how does that differ from an angel investor? And why is, New York Angels, at the time, it was one of the first angel groups ever, right?
Yep, it was one of the early ones. So the very, very first angel group started in probably the late 80s. But by the time after the dot-com crash came around, there were maybe, 50 or so in the country. And so an angel investor is an individual person who invests money into startup companies. And so that's different from a VC or venture capitalist who is a professional money manager. So a VC raises a whole big pot of money called a fund, typically from institutions or organizations that have a lot of cash, things like pension funds and insurance companies and university endowments, stuff like that, and very, very rich people who have lots and lots of money. So the VC raises that fund and then goes and invests it into companies and gets paid by getting a piece of the value that they create. In contrast, angels, like me, are individual people who invest our own money out of our own pocket, not for other people, not responsible to anybody else, and invest as the spirit moves, as it were. And so an angel group is a self-organizing group of these individual angel investors. So New York Angels now has about 120 members, all of whom are individual people who are actively investing in early stage companies. And so we get together, as the reasons the very first angel groups were founded, to pool our funds, to pool and share our deal flow and advice. And so what that means is that acting as a group, or whether the whole group or even just a few members of the group, we can write, bigger checks than anyone could write individually. We see more deals and opportunities than anyone else would individually, and then can, develop a reputation and provide benefits to the companies in which we invest from other people in the group. So it's a good thing.
It's an excellent thing. And later I want to get a bit deeper into your thoughts on investing. But I first wanted to just keep moving chronologically. I wanted to ask you how you moved from New York Angels back to being an entrepreneur, how you got permission back to be a founder again, and with the founding of Gust.
Right. Well, so here I was with background as an angel, as an entrepreneur, right? Started half a dozen companies and a lot of experience there. And then multiple years background as an angel investor, investing in lots of early stage companies. Then along the way, since I've always been a futurist and thinking about technology and the future, I fell into some bad company with a guy named Ray Kurzweil, who've written a book called The Singularity is Near, and Peter Diamandis, who founded the X Prize Foundation. There's an entrepreneur who I invested in some of his companies, including a company Zero G that does zero gravity spaceflight, is now part of Space Adventures. And in studying and looking at the future of where technology was taking the world, I joined with them, and I'm an associate founder of something called Singularity University, which is this postgraduate program in Silicon Valley, all of studying the future and the impact of exponentially growing technologies. So you put all that together, an entrepreneur, angel investor, futurist, and economist, and so on, and it became obvious to me that there was a one-time opportunity, a golden opportunity, to be at the beginning stages of a change in the whole world of finance, where right now all the stock markets in the U.S. together trade about 5,000 different companies. But that's it. On the other hand, every year there are 700,000 companies started. And somehow, if the idea of these stock exchanges and capital markets to get capital into startup companies, that wasn't doing it. But given the fact of the cost of starting a company, as we all know, is dropping like a rock. My first company took $20 million in VC to get to our internet product ship. My second company only took $2 million. My first deal with Andrew, my first angel deal, took $200,000. And then a few years ago, New York Angels invested in a company called Pond5, a deal that I led, which is an online marketplace for video stock footage. And when we invested in, they had a fully operating website, generating revenue, full management team, and they had spent a total of $20,000 to get to that point. So today, your listeners, if you want to start a company, can come up with an idea, go ahead and sketch it out in a napkin, go on to Upwork or one of the freelance sites, have somebody code it in Sri Lanka for a couple of grand, and be up and running. So with the cost of starting a company dropping exponentially like a rock, and my background in the investing side and the entrepreneurial side, I figured that there was a one-time opportunity right then and there to create a whole platform to tie together all of this world of early-stage capital and early-stage entrepreneurs. And I made a case to the spousal authority and finally got permission to start another company, and that's how I started Gust.
So where is Gust at today?
So today, Gust is the sort of world's largest, most interesting community for investors and entrepreneurs. We've got nearly 400,000 companies on the platform who use Gust to collaborate and find and pitch to early stage angel investors and VCs. We've got something like 50,000 accredited angel investors on the platform. We have all kinds of accelerators and incubators and early stage VC seed funds. So we built this global platform, which has entrepreneurs in 190 countries today, localized into 6 languages. And given that kind of scale, Gust now today powers the official online entrepreneurial hubs, the ecosystem hubs for the world's major cities. So New York City, something called digital.nyc, which if your listeners are in the area here, you can go on and find every startup in New York and all the investors and activities and classes and courses and blogs and videos. That's powered by us, as is tech.london for the city of London, Start Hub in Boston, the GIST network for the U.S. Department of State. So we are building this whole global platform in support of entrepreneurship and the people who fund them.
That's excellent. And I love that, Gust. And Digital NYC is a great resource. I know Founder Institute is listed on there. Everyone should definitely check out digital.nyc. So let's take a quick break. We're here with David S. Rose talking about startups, the future of startup and crowdfunding investing, and a little bit about his new book right after the break.
This is Ambition Today with Kevin Siskar. We'll be right back.
Ambition Today is happy to partner with Audible. Visit audibletrial.com/ambition today to download and keep any audiobook for free. David, a question for you. Is there a book on Audible, any book at all, in particular, that people should go check out right now?
Oh, I love Audible, and they have some spectacular books. In particular, one is called The Startup Checklist, 25 Steps to a Scalable High-Growth Business by that renowned author, David S. Rose.
I've heard it's good. And I also just finished listening to Angel Investing, The Gust Guide to Making Money and Having Fun Investing in Startups by that same author just a few months ago.
Indeed. A wonderful book. Also in here, by the way, both books are New York Times bestsellers, which is cool, and have great Amazon reviews. When we did the audio, I sold the audio rights to the first book and then the second one, I said, who's going to record it? And the publisher said, you have such a distinctive New York writing voice that it probably would be appropriate for you to read it as well. So I've actually read both of them, speaking at a somewhat even slower pace than I am in this podcast, which is actually quite a bit slower than I usually speak, because I'm usually, as a New Yorker, speak very, very quickly. So both books are recorded at a pace that you can actually understand, or if you prefer, you can put it on 2x and speed it up to my usual pace.
Well, check it out. The Startup Checklist and Angel Investing, The Gust Guide to Making Money and Having Fun in Investing, both on Audible. Visit audibletrial.com/ambition today to download and keep your audiobook for free. And TopTal. Ambition Today is brought to you by TopTal, TOPTAL.com. Say you have that idea in your head that you just can't shake, but you need someone to build it? Well, visit TopTal.com/ambition today for a free 2-week trial with the top 3% of software developers and designers. You own all the work and the code from anything you build during your trial, and you can get a lot done in 2 weeks, as someone from TopTal will reach out to you almost immediately to get you going. That's TOPTAL.com. TopTal.com/ambition today to get started today. And now back to this episode of Ambition Today.
You're listening to Ambition Today. Visit us now at siskar.co.
Welcome back to this episode of Ambition Today. We're here with David S. Rose. We've been talking about his serial entrepreneurship before the break. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about his new book. So first of all, David, congratulations on hitting the New York Times bestseller list with your now second book, The Startup Checklist. So what drove you to write this book?
Well, thanks a lot. The first book, as you noted, is about angel investing and was designed as the sort of standard textbook for how to be an angel investor. And since it came out, it is clearly the best book on how to be an angel investor, which is frankly is not too much of a challenge if there are no other books on how to become an angel investor. But best it is, and it's sort of become the standard in the industry for training new angels. But what was interesting is that along the way, entrepreneurs started getting the book and reading it to learn what angels were looking for when they were actually being pitched. So we then got enough queries from entrepreneurs saying, "Hey, can you tell us more from behind the scenes, and what does it take to be a really great company that you're looking for?" And then so I started looking around, and as the preface to the book states, there are 93,250 other books about how to start a company on Amazon. So why on earth did anybody need another book? But it turned out, if you look at it, there are really two different categories of books there. One of them are books that have been around for 10, 20, 30 years, sort of how to start a small business. How do you incorporate as an LLC, and how do you, get customers for your dog walking service, and so on and so forth. And those aren't really applicable to the kind of businesses that most of your listeners are starting up, which are designed to be, if not Uber or Twitter, they're designed to be really serious big companies. The other set of books are designed for those entrepreneurs, things like Steve Blank's The Startup Owner's Manual, or Guy Kawasaki, The Art of the Start, or Eric Ries, The Lean Startup. Really great books, except they're all what I call high concept books. How do you find product market fit? What kind of business should you do, and so on. They all leave the quotidian, nuts and bolts stuff to other people, because that's all anybody can do that, right? Well, it turned out that nobody else had actually written about that. So this book is 25 concrete steps to exactly what you need to do to start a high growth startup. It refers you to all those other books for all the big things, right? So it refers you to Eric Ries and to Steve and so on. But this one is the nitty gritty stuff about, how do I divide equity among the co-founders in my team? How do I, what is a stock option, and how do I create a stock option plan? What kind of corporation do I have to be, and why do I need to incorporate in Delaware? How do I get a board of advisors going, and how do I compensate them? And when I start looking for funding, what's the difference between the various online platforms and all that kind of stuff? So it's a very much a detailed, step-by-step, nitty-gritty how to begin to be a really successful, big entrepreneur.
No, I love that. There's definitely a demand for it. Those are a lot of the questions we get, at the Founder Institute, those early stage, how do you set the foundation correctly to build the best business possible on top of it?
Right. And so the challenge is that because nobody has ever actually told you how to do that before, everybody wings it. And, you could be incorporated either by doing something online yourself, or by your local real estate attorney, or your cousin, or whatever. And then you say, hey, I'm going to need 3 co-founders, and we'll all split the equity or something. You never really document anything. Then you hire an employee and you say, I'll give you, 2%. And you never, give them actually an option grant. And so then when it comes time for me to come around as an investor, and I, say, hey, I'd love to, put $100,000 or whatever into the company. Let's do the due diligence. And I then look at it and say, give me all your stock option plan. Oh, what stock option plan? Do you have IP assignments? Do you have, A, B, and C? And so it turns out, if you ask any lawyer, that something between, 50 and 75% of the legal expenses around investments are all about cleaning up all the stuff that was done wrong the first time. And so this book shows you how to do it absolutely right and perfectly.
So where can people pick up a copy?
It's available wherever fine books are sold. Since it's New York Times bestseller, it's available at Barnes & Noble, and of course on Amazon. And on Amazon, you can get it in hardcover. You can get it in Audible, as you mentioned. You can get it in Kindle. You can get it on Nook and on BN.com. So any way you want it, we'll give it to you.
And I have it right here. I just got it about a week ago, and I started reading it. It's excellent so far. So congratulations, and I really look forward to it helping thousands of entrepreneurs elsewhere as well.
My pleasure.
So I want to shift gears now to the recent Jobs Act Title III announcements. This is around, I know you're the expert in this, and this is why I'm really excited to have you on. So this is around equity crowdfunding, selling part of your company in exchange for money, which previously you had to be an accredited investor for. So I want to lay the foundation for this conversation by first asking, what is an accredited investor? Why is it that a civilian can bet all their life savings on black or red in a casino, but they could not invest in the next Google or Facebook?
That's a good question. So the answer to that is that they used to be able to do that a long time ago. And in the 1920s, the roaring 20s, people would do that. And stock promoters would come along and say, hey, I've got this really cool thing here. It's going to be the end of everything is spectacular. You can make $1 billion. And they would sell it to widows and orphans who would put their life savings into these crazy things. They were being promised, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And so guess what happened? And then along came 1929, the stock market crashed and everything got wiped out. And so around that time, the government said, okay, something's wrong with this operation. Free markets are great, but we need to have some kind of protections for people from being swayed by all these charlatans. And so the Securities and Exchange Commission was put into place, and they put a bunch of laws in place, and it said that, sure, anybody can sell stock in this company. You can sell ownership in a company to anybody you want to, except that in order to do that, you better be very transparent about what's going on. We're not going to tell anybody what's good or bad, but we are going to insist that if you want to sell stock, you have to publicize all of you, open your books and file filed reports, every quarter with the government and say, here's our profit, here's our loss, here's where the money is going to, here's who owns the company, and so on and so forth. And a lot of regulation and clarity around it. And that's fine. And that was great. The only problem is over time, those burdens got to be more and more and more. And if you are a public company now, you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every year in filings and lawyers and disclaimers. And if you want to sell stock to the public, you're going to spend probably $1 million in an IPO, an initial public offering, where you have this voluminous document which lists all the risks and all the possible things that could go wrong and so on and so forth, which makes a lot of sense if you're selling to widows and orphans. But along the way, the SEC realized that not every company needs to sell to only widows and orphans, but you do need some cash. And so they said, okay, if you want to sell stock in your company to people who are not, to people who are interested in investing in you, you can do that. However, you can only do that to people who we know can lose the money, can afford to lose the money. So therefore, you can only sell to people who are sophisticated and rich. And we're going to call them accredited investors. So we will exempt you from all those filing regulations if the only people you sell to are accredited investors. And so that's how this thing came into play, that the only people you can sell stock to are accredited investors. You can sell to anybody you want to if you go public. But because going public is such a bear, that's why startup companies don't do it. And so they defined accredited investors. The current definition, which has changed over time, of an accredited investor is somebody who has either $1 million in assets, in net worth, not including the value of their home, or somebody whose annual income is over $200,000 a year for 3 years in a row, or if you file jointly with your spouse, $300,000. And the feeling is that's a very imperfect definition, but like democracy, it's the best system, the worst system there is, except for all the others. So therefore, it's what we have right now. And the idea is that if you have that kind of money, you either are rich enough or sophisticated enough so you can afford to lose it. And so historically, that was the rule. But as companies require less and less capital to get started, as we just discussed, and as you now only need to raise maybe 50,000, 25,000, 100,000, $1 million, not 10 million from people, there are a lot of people who make decent incomes, who are interested in investing in the future, who would love to do this, but are not accredited investors. And so that's where the new regulations came into play.
And so the Jobs Act was passed in 2012. It took the SEC, I think, 4 years to release the rulings on it. And so can you just give a quick recap of what changes? What does the Jobs Act change?
So the Jobs Act of 2012 was about the only thing passed that year because Congress and the president, everybody was all gridlocked. The one thing they could agree on was that helping startups was a good thing. So the Jobs Act is the wonderful federal acronym standing for Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act of 2012, signed by the president. And it did three things with three different timings. The first thing was it made it easier for a company to stay public, to stay private, and then it made it easier for a company to go public once it decided to go public. And those regulations went into play immediately when the regulation was signed. And then Congress said to the SEC, okay, we now want to make it possible for people to sell to accredited investors, because the rules used to say that not only can you only sell to accredited investors, the only people you can talk to about this thing are people who you already know. So you can't tell anybody you're raising money. And that was a little weird, obviously, right? Because how can you raise money if you can't tell anybody you're raising money? So the second part, Title II, said, okay, you can tell anybody you want that you're raising money as long as you only take the money actually in from accredited investors, which is a much more rational approach to doing that. So it took them about a year and a half to get that going. And so in 2013, September 2013, that was finally put into place. And so that was Title II. And that's what enabled platforms like the ones you see around today, Seed Invest and Circle Up and the various online platforms. Those are dealing with accredited investors. They're telling everybody they're raising funds, but they only take money from accrediteds. The third piece of the Jobs Act, Title III, Congress said, okay, to the SEC, figure out a way to allow regular people, not accredited investors, to invest in companies. Here are the general outlines. You have to have, you can invest no more than 10% of your income or assets. You have to do it, and that's across all companies all year. Come up with the rules. The problem was the SEC really doesn't think this is a good idea. The SEC remembers institutionally back to the days of blue sky stuff in the Depression and the crash, and they think it's very risky, and they really dragged their feet, to the point that Congress called it back in and said, SEC administrator, what is going on? We told you to do this. And years passed. And so finally, from the Jobs Act of 2012, it took until May 15th of 2016, 4 years, before the SEC reluctantly, dragging his feet, said, okay, I guess if you really force us, you can do it. So that's what went live this week. So the rules for Title III say that a company can now raise money from people who are not accredited investors. And it lays out a lot of rules for doing that, which make it's not trivial. You can't just go out in the street and say, hey, give me money and here's some stock in my company. There are 200 and some odd pages of rules that define exactly how it works and how you can do it. The bottom line being, it can only be done through either a registered broker-dealer or else through what's called a funding portal. This is an online funding platform that will specialize in doing this. And so right now there are a bunch of folks who are doing this, folks like Seed Invest and Nextseed and WeFunder and so on, who have now opened up shop to do these Title III unaccredited crowdfunding rules. So what do the rules say, you might ask? The rules say that, first of all, if your income or your net worth, okay, either one, is below $100,000, okay, then during any 12-month period, you can invest no more than $2,000 or 5% of the lesser of your income or net worth. So what that's saying is if you don't really have a lot of disposable cash to play around with, you really are not allowed to go putting it behind these crazy startups, because startups are very, very risky. And so this is sort of designed to help the friends and family around, so you can get money from people who love you and want to do it, a little bit of money to help you get started. On the other hand, if your income and your net worth is over $100,000, which means you're not yet an accredited investor with the $1 million range, but you have some means and a decent salary. Then you're allowed to invest up to 10% of your income or the lesser of your income or your net worth in any 1 year period, any 12-month period. So that means if you have up to say 200,000, 199,000 income, you can invest $19,000 across all companies in that period. That's on the investor side. On the investee side, for a company, you can raise up to $1 million. So this is not going to replace a venture capital round where you're raising $3, $5, $10 million out there. You can raise a total of $1 million from all of these people. And then there are requirements of both the company and the end users to fit in with these regulations. So, for example, if a startup is raising under $500,000, it has to have an accountant look at their documents. If it's 500,000 to $1 million, you got to have them an independent CPA actually audit your stuff and so on. And then whichever way you do it, if you raise funds as a company through Title III of the Jobs Act, you are required every year to file reports with your investors and the SEC. Not the kind of comprehensive reports you need to do for a public company, but nevertheless reports about profit and loss and what you're doing.
Wow, that was concise and completely thorough. So excellent. You completely answered the question across investors, startups, the recap of the Jobs Act. I love it. So that's excellent, and that's immensely helpful to the audience.
Well, it'll be interesting, Kevin, to see what happens.
So how do you see this changing the landscape moving forward?
The answer is right now, nobody knows. There are a lot of smart people who are on both sides of the table. Some people, particularly the platforms, will tell you this is going to change the face of investing. For the first time, we're opening up, everybody in the entire planet, can invest in these startup companies. It'll be a great day where, anybody doesn't have to go and find rich angels or VCs. You can go and raise money from people and people, your customers and so on and so forth. The other side of the table says, okay, you know what? First of all, the regulations are pretty tough about this. And what you're talking about is for somebody, at the low end, $2,000 a year in total across all companies, right? So it takes a lot of people, even if a person invests just in your company, one company, that's the only company invests in all year, it still takes a lot of people at $2,000 a pop to equal $1 million. which you're trying to raise. And so then if you're investing in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 companies, if you want to, as a non-accredited investor, get involved in this world and like a Kickstarter campaign or Indiegogo, spread your investments across a number of things, you're investing now hundreds of dollars or very, very low thousands. So it's going to take a lot of people to make up any kind of significant numbers for companies. The fact that you are filing reports every year, public reports, a lot of companies may not actually want to do that because if you're in stealth mode, it's difficult to file public reports about your stealth mode, right? And then finally, there are costs attendant to it. The platforms take their fees for charging. You have to write up various kinds of plans and so on to do it. So the second group of people think that it's going to have very, very little impact at all. My gut is somewhere in the middle. I think that I don't think it's going to change the face. I don't think you're going to currently see $1 billion a year, coming into startups that are falling off trees. I think it's going to be one possible way of funding a company. Right now, there are lots of other kind of ways. I mean, you can get grants, SBIR grants from the federal government to help fund a startup, and the odds on that are actually surprisingly good. There's angel investing, there are friends and family rounds. I think this will be most useful for people who are doing friends and family rounds to finally provide a clean, legal, legitimate way to document a friends and family round.
Yeah, I think it'll be fascinating to see, even a year from now, what sort of data that there is around the amount invested through this method. But you're right, cleaning up the friends and family round and giving them a legitimate means to get into, even your brother or sister's startup company is huge. So that'll be majorly impactful. All right, so I wanted to jump to the Ambition Day question of the day. And today's Ambition Day question of the day is, why does success matter in the first place? Why not just go the other direction and live a simple life in a fishing town where you have all the peacefulness that comes with finding success?
The answer to that depends on how you define success. What is success? Now you, Mr. Siskar, who posed this question, I ask you, why is living a simple life in a fishing town not successful? I can tell you there are many, many people living in fishing towns with wonderful, quiet existences who think they are very, very successful. Now, it may not be successful to you, but it is to them. So the first thing is to figure out what makes sense for you to define success. And success, in my book, doesn't mean necessarily money or name recognition or power. It's a sort of self-satisfaction and self-gratification. The ancient Greeks had a wonderful expression. Their definition of happiness or success was the exercise of one's vital powers along lines of excellence in a life affording its scope. And so if you are doing what you enjoy doing and you're doing it well and you're reaching for it, and that's the whole question of flow, you're in a state of flow. I mean, somebody who is a downhill skier, an Olympic skier, they are at their absolute best flow moment, having total success flow when they're jumping off a ski jump and heading downhill. For me, that's not success. That's craziness. So, that would not be my success. On the other hand, I love reading and writing term sheets. I love figuring out complex, business deals and stuff. I love selling things and presenting and so on. For many people, that would be a horror. I mean, if you had to live life in my shoes, you'd go screaming into the darkness, right? I mean, for me, this is success. So the important thing is to figure out what is important to you, and that's why it matters, because it will make you happy.
Fantastic answer. And I love that quote about the Romans and how they defined it. That's
Greeks,
awesome. Greeks, sorry. All right, well, great. So if you're still listening, listen up. If you enjoy the show, then leave a review in the iTunes store. Really appreciate it. And if you don't know how to do so, visit siskar.co/review and we'll show you how. Also, screenshot this episode right now, go share it on Instagram, and also put in your favorite quote from David or myself. David, thank you for coming on today. And where can people find out more about you?
My pleasure. My own personal website is davidsrose.com. You can create a profile for your startup at gust.com. You can follow me on Twitter at davidsrose. And I look forward to hearing from people.
Excellent. David, thank you again for coming on. Incredibly insightful. Thank you. Everyone, stay curious, and I will see you on the next episode of Ambition Today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ambition Today with your host, Kevin Siskar. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit www.siskar.co. We'll catch you next time.